Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to June on the Range. Great BookTube event created by Michael K. Vaughan, designed to celebrate Westerns in all their various shapes and sizes. Westerns that were once upon a time one of the most popular kinds of fiction. They have now fallen into desuetude. They are a tiny little niche reading project, but once upon a time they were big, and June on the Range puts them back in the spotlight and celebrates them. I love it. Look forward to it every year. I started off June on the Range with overdosing on one particular writer. I actually read more of his novels than I showed on camera. William McLeod Rain was his name. He was a turn of the 20th century Western writer who wasn't born in America and actually did go out and see the frontier while there still was one. I read a bunch of his novels. I'm not ruling him out. I will read more. I may even read more of him for June on the Range 2024. But after a while, his novels seemed a little twee to me. They seemed like I'm tittering a little. I'm meaning to amuse you. Even when my stories are getting violent, I'm meaning to amuse you. I want you to know that I don't take this genre all that seriously, and you shouldn't either, no matter what happens. I'm going to add a little bit of silent movie, mustache-twirling melodrama to what I'm doing, just to remind you that I know this isn't serious fiction that I'm writing. And I like that. Rain is good at that. I got too much of it. I got a little too much of it. I don't really advise reading too many of McLeod Rain's books in a row. And I did that. I think that's what I did. So I wanted a break. I briefly got a break of a completely different kind. With a contemporary gay Western cowboy romance. But what I wanted, that break notwithstanding, that break was caused by the algorithm. But what I wanted, really, when I finished all those Rain books, was, as I put it at the time, a Western author who takes it seriously. Doesn't mean that the novel has to be serious. But I want the author to take it seriously. I don't know if I can explain what that is, but I definitely know it when I feel it. And so I went looking in the bowels of my tablet, and I found an author I've read before and really liked. I've read him largely as a result of June on the Range. And the author is Terry Johnson. And Terry Johnson wrote a whole bunch of books. They're big, meaty, historically grounded books. They aren't like a lot of Westerns that I've read. And I read the first book he wrote a series. This went on from here. There was a series starring a character named Seamus Donegan, who is a Irish immigrant to the American West, but he's big and broad and two-fisted and likes to see right done. Those of you who only know your Westerns, Sue, for instance, Lonesome Dove, will remember the two Irish immigrants in that book. They're fairly hapless individuals. Seamus Donegan is not. And I read the first of those books, which is Sue Dawn. And I said that I want an author to take Western seriously, but the novel doesn't have to be serious. Well, it doesn't get much more serious than this. And I get the impression that the whole series of this novels, this is number one in that series, but I get the impression that the whole series is incredibly serious. This is about the Fetterman Massacre. That is the climax of this book is an incident in Old West history called the Fetterman Massacre, which was part of Red Cloud's War. It was part of a much larger conflict between the outward waves of white Western encroachment and the native peoples who were trying to resist that encroachment. In this particular case, the center of all the action is Fort Phil Kearny, which was an outpost built in, I think it was built in Crow territory. It was built in hostile territory, so that every single party that was trying to build this thing, the people who were going in to dig the foundations, they had to have an armed escort with a ring of armed soldiers all around them at all times. They'd all have been picked off. The party that goes in to set up the palisade fences and the houses, they all had to have armed escorts. And once Fort Phil Kearny was up and running as an army post with all sorts of civilians there, all the foraging parties on which the whole fort depended all had to have armed escorts at all times of the day or night. You're going out for lumber, for heating. You're going out for forage, for hay, bedding. Every single party that went out like that had to have an armed escort because the locals, the native peoples, were extremely angry that you were there at all. The Red Cloud's War, they were extremely angry about the Bozeman Trail. They didn't want a non-stop flow of white people coming to settle on their land. So the Lakota and the Cheyenne, with a few Arapaho, fought against the U.S. government and the U.S. government's allies among the Crow Nation. They fought against this encroachment. And that larger war lasted for a couple of years. That was Red Cloud's War. But the Fetterman Massacre was a signature event in that war. This is named after Captain William Fetterman, who led 81 men to their deaths at the hand of the Cheyenne and the Lakota Sioux. 81 men were massacred. That was huge. That is absolutely huge. It's overshadowed in the popular memory by Little Bighorn. But that is absolutely huge. And that is the absolute historical focus of this book. You're never far away from it. You know what's coming. You know what it's going to be. And you know a lot. Well, the more you know about the subject, the more you know the characters involved. Because Terry Johnston invents almost nobody. This book is from the high command, Grant and Sheridan, all the way down Crook and whatnot, and all of the Native American characters. There's a huge number of historical people in this book. And that is... I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. It's a heartbreaking historical subject. It's just a better armed and more numerous people invading the territory of a lesser armed and less numerous people and either wiping them out or enslaving them. That's all that it is. That's what the larger story here is. And I think, if I remember correctly, the rest of the books in this series each deal with another signature incident in Red Cloud's War. I don't know. But I think I might be finding out, because it wasn't just the history that was the allure of this book. It's Terry Johnston himself. What a writer. What an energetic writer. Oh my. It wasn't just the history involved here. I was turning pages because he makes this into a great, gripping narrative. His sympathies lie with the enlisted men. His sympathies lie with Fetterman's men. And I don't know. I don't know. My own sympathies do not. It's going to depend on where you land on the question. There were native peoples fighting on both sides of this war, fighting against each other. And long before any of those tribes had heard about white people or even guessed that they existed, they were still fighting against each other. So where you stand, it is a war novel. Regardless of where you stand on the merits or the colonialism or the expansionism or anything like that, it's a war novel with a gigantic signature war catastrophe as its narrative focus, even though the focus is not the center of the book. That it's extremely well done. I really, really enjoyed it. I can't remember. I was racking my brains when I was reading this last night. I can't remember who it was who actually soaringly recommended this author to me. It might have been Michael K. Vaughan. He did an invaluable video years ago when he was just starting June on the Range about some of his favorite authors. And I stalked these things when I worked in bookstores. I read a few of them, and I read the big ones that got a lot of crossover New York Times attention. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I largely went by that. But I largely left the rest of these things alone. I read the classics. I read Warlock. I read Shane. I read a couple of Louis L'Amour. Of course, read Lonesome Dove. And Laughing Boy. A couple of others. But I thought that I knew what these things were. I thought all the authors are the same and none of them are any good. And then I saw that video by Mike a few years ago talking about some of his favorite writers. And in the course of June on the Range over the years, I've learned a lot of that from a lot of you as well. And I can't remember, that all blurs together. I can't remember who it was who said I really ought to read this author. But whoever it was, originally, you were right. This author and I get along really well on the page. And he also resists the urge to make Seamus Donegan a Superman, which is great. Seamus Donegan is extremely flawed, but all the more believable. It raises all sorts of interesting questions about how much you need made-up characters in historical drama. Do you need them at all? And if so, how much do you need them? Johnston says in his introduction to this book, his preface to this book really gives a window into his mind, and his postscript does as well. I think I would have liked this guy. I don't know anything about his life. I know a little bit about Louis L'Amour's life because I read his book on his life, but I don't know anything about this guy's life. But I think I would have liked him. Uh, and in his preface, he says, the history is great and gripping and appalling and bloody, but I want to do more in this book than just give you the history. I want you to smell the horseflesh. I want you to feel the dust in the air. And I need fiction to do that. And I kind of agree. I kind of agree. A lot of historical novelists don't come out and admit that. But I like that. He definitely gives his fictional characters, there are three of them, three main fictional characters in this book, he definitely gives them second shrift to the historical characters in here, which is pretty humble for a writer who are all egomaniacs. so I have returned June on the Range to very solid footing. This was really, really good. I'm actually tempted. I just had the experience of having an unforeseen outside circumstance start to dictate my reading. That's not a pleasant experience. But I am actually tempted to just read the next book in the series. I think there's a book in the series called Red Cloud's War. I'm really tempted to just go right ahead, but I don't want... If I'm going to let June on the Range be devoted to any writer, it's going to be Louis L'Amour. Unless maybe it should be Terry Johnston. Louis L'Amour's not going anywhere, right? He doesn't need me. I don't know. That's one of the fun things about BookTube events is that I don't know. I will go about my day. It's early morning here. You'd think it was the middle of the night. There's no light at all. It's pouring rain here, so there's no light whatsoever. And in one of my videos that I made today, I had to turn on all the lights in the room. Ceiling light and all of the little banker shade lights. And at one point in an earlier video today, very melodramatically, one of the banker shade light bulbs went out in the middle of the video. Dun, dun, dun. But, and I have been told over and over again, when a light on a lampshade like that goes out, my first impulse is to get up and change it. And I've been told over and over again in my life, don't do that. Wait an hour. You can't feel it, but the light bulb is actually burning hot. You can't feel it, but you'll hurt yourself. So wait an hour before you change it. So I'm just waiting. I'm just waiting an hour. I instinctively, since childhood, I just look at the clock when something like that happens because I'm not allowed to touch it for an hour. But it's still early days. So in the course of today, I have writing to do. I have one deadline to do today, but it is Sunday, and one of my deadlines is tomorrow, so I'll probably do two today. I have other videos to make. Of course, I have the baby Bean to pamper. She needs extra pampering when it's raining because we're not going outside. And I have other BookTube events. God knows, I'm up to my eyeballs in BookTube events. So I don't, in the course of the day, as I'm fiddling around, I will be adding books to the night's reading. And one of those will certainly be another Western for June on the Range. I love June on the Range. I wait all year for it. I just don't know if it'll be another Terry Johnston. Maybe there's nothing wrong with reading a lot of this guy. Maybe not. But I will report back. You'll be the first to know. So I'll wrap this up for now. That is my June on the Range for this time around. And I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.